I look crazy, I know. I'm basically going to apologize for how bad the setup looks. It's very dark, and my birthday is Sunday, and I'm turning 20, so I'm hoping that for a birthday present, my boyfriend will help me rearrange my room in a way that is better for videos, because my desk is the furthest away from the window, because the window's behind me, and I'm on my, oop, that was my dog. I'm on my bed, so you can't really, it's hard to see, and then there's no light. And I have a lamp, but it doesn't really help. So I'm hoping that I can just arrange it in a way that makes it better to record in. Because normally I record my videos at school in a study room, and the lighting's amazing, and everything's fine, because there's literally a window right beside me. But I can't really do that here, so I am going to figure out a way to fix that problem. But yeah, the lighting's not the best in this video, so just ignore it, and it's fine. We can just listen to my voice, it's okay. So, we're starting off in 1 Samuel 13. I made a video about this on my Instagram, but I didn't talk in it. It was just a very, very short time lapse. So I highlighted a bunch of verses, but I wrote down, I highlighted the end of 8 and all of 9, and I talked about how, this is not what Samuel instructed Saul to do in chapter 10 and 8. He tells him to wait there, and that he being Samuel, would do the offering. But Saul got a little impatient, and he decided that, he knows better than Samuel, so he's just going to do it. So he did it, and he wasn't authorized to do it because it was supposed to be Samuel. So that is kind of where you start to see the fall of Saul. That kind of rhymes, fall, Saul. Anyways, so then I moved on to verse 14, and I have two different things that I highlighted. So so overall the entire verse is linked to Acts 13 and 22, but the phrase that the Lord hath sought a man after his own heart, I said obviously was David, and then I said a reminder that we're supposed to be people after God's own heart. That's what we should strive to be. We should strive to have that title. And then in verse 19, it says that there was no smith, and that means a blacksmith. And I saw in a thing that I was reading that Israel lacked the ability to produce iron until the time of Solomon. And so I wrote that down because that was interesting, because I've never actually noticed that. So that is the end of 13. I didn't really write a lot of stuff down, but it was a really short chapter. It was only 23 verses. So now we go to chapter 14. 14 is about how Jonathan defeated the Philistines, and Saul wasn't aware, and Saul made the really not so smart command to not eat anything at all. So for verses 6 and 13, I said, when you have the Lord and you invite him to fight with you, you will have victory, because there's no one equal to him. There's no one that can overpower him. He's unmatched in all ways, so there's absolutely no one who can beat him. So you're determined to have victory. So in verse 7, I said that his armor bearer is very loyal, and I said we need to have this loyalty, because could you imagine being two people going up against an entire army, and the guy's like, yeah, we can do it. It would be so scary. But he was loyal. I don't know, I just think that we should have that kind of loyalty, because even in this really, really tense, scary situation, he said to do whatever is in thine heart. And so we need to have that loyalty, especially to God, because whatever he wants to do, even if we don't really like it, or even if we don't really want to do it, if he wants us to do it, we should do it. And then in verses 24 through 26, my page flipped. I said that this is about the command that was not very smart. I said that this really impacted their ability to fight, because if you think about it, if you go without eating and you're just starving, that's all you can think about. All you can think about is foods. What are you gonna eat? When are you gonna be able to eat it? And that would really distract you if you're supposed to be in the middle of a war. So I said it was not a good command, and that not all advice is good advice, because this was not good anything. It was not very smart. And then I highlighted 27, 29, and 30, which is Jonathan. He eats honey, and his eyes were enlightened, as the scripture says. And so he says that it was a good thing because, now he feels like he can take on an entire army because he feels strong, and that's what happens whenever you don't go on an empty stomach. And I said, like I said, advice is not all advice is good advice. And then, I don't know if you saw on my Instagram story, but I started doing a thing where I put the main topics or the main themes on the top of my page or near the top of my page if I can't fit it on the top. And so for this page, I said advice and leadership because that's basically what I talked about. And so that is, oh no, I'm a liar. That's not the end of chapter 14. So then I go to verse 47, and I say that everyone around them wanted them out of Canaan, that them being the Israelites. And so that happened as soon as they got to the promised land, basically, because they drove out people of their home, and so the people that were driven out didn't want them there, and the people surrounding them didn't want them there. So they were constantly having to fight to stay there. And then 49, it mentions Merib and Michael and Ahinoam. Oh my goodness. See, I can't pronounce anything, guys. I'm pretty sure you know this by now, like listening to all my studies. I'm like, or however you say it. It's Ahinoam. So Ahinoam. You know what I'm trying to say. She is the wife of Saul. So I know that I say this seriously every single time I do a study because there's always a woman mentioned. I always have to explain why I put so much focus on it. This year I'm doing a study over the women of the Bible. It's something I do every year. Whenever I read through the Bible, I pick one subject or one phrase or one word to study, and that's what I do. I did Be Not Afraid one year. I did Courage in the same year. I think I did Be Not Afraid and Courage at the same time. And then last year I did Boldness, so I focused on boldness. And this year I'm focusing on the women of the Bible. So I wrote all three of these women down, and I wrote little descriptions of them. So I said who they're related to, who they're married to, if they're married, and what they did. There wasn't really a good description on this one because it just said this was his daughter or this was his wife. There wasn't very many descriptions on them, but later in the book we'll learn more about them, and then I'll add more later on. And so that is the end of chapter 14. So we move on to chapter 15. So 15 is about Saul and Samuel, and once again Saul just does not listen. He does not know how to listen in this chapter. So I highlighted verse 3, and I specifically highlighted and spare them not because that will come into play later. And then in verse 6, it talks about the Canaanites, and I explain how the Canaanites were descendants of Moses' father-in-law because sometimes I get all the ites confused, like the Amalekites, the Amalek, like all those people. I get them confused. So I put the Kenites were descendants of Moses' father-in-law. And then in verse 9, I said that, there are multiple things here. So this was disobedience, whether Saul recognized it or not, because he was told to not spare anything or anyone. And so he not only spared, the sheep, he spared the oxen, the lambs, and just basically everything. And it says that all that was good, and he did not utterly destroy them, which is what he was told to do. So even if he didn't recognize it as disobedience, it was disobedience, and we all know that disobedience to God equals sin. I wrote that at the bottom. And so before I get into the rest of it, we'll move on to verse 15. And then 19, 20, and 21, they're all kind of linked in this. So here you see that Saul doesn't even recognize that he sinned. He keeps saying that he still obeyed God, and he keeps placing the blame on other people. Like he says that I listened to the voices of those, or because I feared the people and obeyed their voices. So he was blaming other people or saying that he didn't do anything wrong. And so you can really see his spiritual state here because he doesn't even recognize that he's doing anything wrong. And then if you go back to verse 9, it says, but Saul and the people. And so I said Saul was involved, if you saw me write that down. That was directed towards this verse because he keeps acting like he's not involved at all and it wasn't really his choice and he didn't really do anything, even though it clearly says that Saul and the people did it. So then I went to I went to verse 22 and 23. And then I just re-uttered that obedience is better than sacrifice, and submission to God is always better than anything you could do. Rebellion is just as bad as witchcraft, because God views sin the same way. Like, we tend to view it, lying isn't as bad as stealing, or stealing isn't as bad as lying, so at least I'm not a liar and I'm just a thief, or at least I'm a thief and not a liar. But that's not how it really is. All sin is sin, and so we're not better off because we do one certain thing and not the other thing. So then in verses 25, 30, and 31, it talks about Saul wanting to worship God. And I said, while Saul was being disobedient, I respected the fact that he still wanted to worship God and not be bitter. Because sometimes whenever God corrects us about something, we can get really bitter and we can be like, well, you know what, I'm not going to do anything today. I'm going to go to church Sunday and I'm not going to worship you at all. I'm just going to sit there. So I understood that he did do something very wrong in this chapter, but I respected the fact that he didn't be bitter about it and he still worshiped God anyways. And then in verse 35, it talks about how Samuel mourned for Saul. And so I said, even with all that Saul had done, and he was a witness to it because he saw it happen and he was there, Samuel still loved him. And I said that we should have this kind of unconditional love because we should love people regardless of what they do. Now, there's a difference between supporting someone in their wrongdoing and then just loving them while they are doing wrong. So we don't need to just cut them completely out of our lives because they're doing something we don't agree with, and we don't need to be rude to them because they're doing something we don't agree with. We should still love them, just like Samuel loved Saul, and he mourned for Saul. And we don't have to just completely remove them out of our lives. Now, if they start influencing you to do things, then removing them from your life would probably be a good idea, but we don't need to just completely cut someone off because they're struggling with something, because it's better to be there and try to help them get through it than to be like, well, you know what, you're doing this, so I'm not really your friend anymore because you don't agree with me, So love people even when they do some not so smart things, and have that kind of unconditional love that Samuel had for Saul. And that is basically the end of chapter 15. I didn't really get into chapter 16 in this video, I don't think, but I totally recommend reading 16 because it talks about how David is chosen to be king, and it really just goes through leadership and appearance and how, we aren't qualified or disqualified because of how we look, or something as simple as how tall we are, or if we're conventionally pretty or not, So that one's a really good verse, sorry. I keep saying verse when I mean chapter, and chapter when I mean verse. It's a very good chapter to read, and I'm probably going to finally do the first Samuel, not we're in first Samuel, but the first chapters of first Samuel, because I saved them specifically to do a study with me, and I have never gotten around to putting all my notes into the Bible and and doing it while I'm on video. So I hope that I finally do that. I'll have that one up soon, and I also have a Ruth video to do, and then I also have an Ephesians 1 video to do with Harrison. So I have a lot of plans, and I'm not trying to slack off on them. It's just I have so much plans. I'm trying to be ambitious, and it's just Anyways, I'm sorry this video was very dark because the lighting was awful, but I will try to fix it. So I hope you have a great day, and I hope that you learn something from these notes, and I hope that you can apply them to your life somehow in some way, and that if you do use my notes and you write them down somewhere, I would totally love to see them. I'm not really one of those people who gets offended when someone writes something down from their Bible, unless you try to say that it was your stuff, and then I kind of get a little irritated because that's basically plagiarism. But if you're one of those people who just writes it down and you don't try to say that it's yours, I love that. I love that people actually find my videos helpful. So please let me know if you do.